The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's a new piece called If You're Rich, You're More Lucky Than Smart, and there's math to prove it, that has been making the rounds the last day or so. And it's very well written, although it's a little bit short on sort of like this actual science and data backing up that claim. But it's a really interesting topic that I want to talk about because it's something that I've been talking about for a long time. And that's that we like to think of our society as a meritocracy, right? One where people have what they've earned and what they deserve because of the actions they've taken and the decisions they've made and their talent and their intelligence and so on and so forth. And especially if you're a defender of sort of the unregulated, so-called free market capitalism, you want to push this idea, right? That the system, if it's unequal because people have what they deserve, people have what they have earned. And it's a way to sort of rationalize or feel better about the insane inequality that we have in our society. That being said, most reasonable people would understand that that's not exactly right, that it doesn't really just work out that everybody gets exactly what they deserve and it's based on talent or intelligence or whatever other metric you want to point to. So for an example, when you look at class mobility, right, we know that upward mobility is really low in the United States. Even equally smart people with similar parenting situations and adjusting for other factors, if you're born poor, it is much more likely that you will end up living a life of a poor person or a lower middle class person than if you were to be born rich. We just know that, right? And it disconnects from the distribution that we have of intelligence or so-called talent or industriousness or whatever factor you want to look at. But once you accept that, there's still this idea that if you do become rich, whether you started poor, lower middle class or upper middle class, that if you end up rich, you did it again on your merits. You worked hard, or you're smart, or a combination of the two. And there's now a study from the University of Catania in Italy, which looks at the role of chance in life success, or we might say it looks at the role of luck, some people call it, or randomness. We can use these terms sort of interchangeably for our discussion here. And what sort of got Professor Alessandro Pluchino looking at this is that he noticed, as many other people have, that there's a sort of 80-20 distribution of wealth, that 20% of the people have about 80% of the wealth, but that the skills and the talent seem to follow a much more standard distribution bell curve pattern. So then simple mathematics questions why it is that that would be the case if there is not some element of randomness, right? What accounts for the concentration of wealth in a way that separates or doesn't track distribution of talent and intelligence? Because it is really, really unequal. Like I gave you the 80-20 number, 20% of people have 80% of the wealth. The richest 1% have about 50% of the world wealth. And what this study and others have found is that increasingly the answer is luck. Luck doesn't literally need to mean luck like casino luck type of thing, which I believe is just odds, of course, but it includes elements of what we might call luck or odds, such as the timing of when you start a business or when you graduate with a particular degree that puts you on a path to prosperity of sorts. There's a lot of these factors that you don't control. If you had been born 2 years earlier or 2 years later, the same talent, the same characteristics would not have led to the same prosperity that they might have in the real world. Luck can also just be having born to a rich family, right? That's a huge predictor of wealth. Were you born to a rich family? That's a different sort of type of luck, or I guess we'd call it chance. And what Professor Pluchino did is to run some simulations and rerun them time and again, distributing wealth to people on the basis of certain levels of skill, intelligence, ability, talent, and the factor that ended up creating the distributions that we see in the real world, right? This extreme inequality is to add an element of randomness, which we could attribute to, like I said, timing, right place, right time, rich parents, whatever else the case may be. Every time that Professor Pluchino and his team reran the simulation, the results differed slightly. But what was always the case was that the wealthiest 20% were not the most talented 20%. And it was so lopsided that randomness, which in the real world we call luck or timing or whatever, played a huge role. And it pushed some people into the top in terms of wealth, regardless of ability. And it kept a ton of people with no shortage of ability or intelligence or industriousness out of being top earners. So there's no question that this one study isn't all-encompassing. It doesn't account for every variable, right? But increasingly, we are learning that we simply do not have a meritocracy as many people think that we do. And this relates to one of the underlying principles of my political philosophy, which is where I end up disagreeing with lots of people on the right. If you believe that there is a direct one-to-one relationship between effort and success, or between intelligence and success, you are willing to accept certain economic systems. Only when you realize that your success, although it might seem inevitable or obvious to you, was the result of, in great part, chance or timing or odds or luck, whatever word you want to use, you should, if you're a reasonable person, rethink how society should be organized. And this connects to one of the most interesting political philosophies, which is a theory of justice by John Rawls. Rawls published a theory of justice in 1971. And the brilliant thing about a theory of justice is that it suggests if we were to come together to figure out how to organize society, right? If we said, let's meet and say, forget about how society is organized. Let's come up all together on a plan. We should do it from what Rawls calls an original position, which means if I come to the table to figure out how to organize society, I don't come in and design society to work for me if I'm already David Pakman, the owner of an established business with a few employees and I already own a house, right? I need to design a society that I would accept if I were back at zero and I didn't know what my luck of the draw would be. Would I be born into a very poor family or very rich family? Would I be born somewhere with more economic opportunities or fewer? And the premise is that if you don't know which straw you will draw in life, you're going to be much more incentivized to actually think about what sort of an organization makes sense, regardless of whether you're rich or upper middle class, but for everybody. It's a thought experiment for sure, Pat, and I think it's an interesting one. I don't know if you're familiar with Rawls's theory of justice, but increasingly, luck plays a big role in success.
Yes, I am familiar with the theory of justice, and for Rawls, the solution wasn't a free market or everyone being equal. It was providing a strong social welfare system and still allowing that upward mobility. And to the broader point, maybe luck should be a factor because we want to encourage entrepreneurship, we want to encourage risk-taking, but it shouldn't be the top thing. I mean, intelligence, how hard you work, that should rank at the top, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I would argue, even if you don't have those things, you should still actually have an opportunity to live a good life, and I think that's the flip side of it, that sometimes we see this and we say, success shouldn't depend on luck, it should depend on skill. But are we saying that if you happen to be born lacking particular skills or predispositions to do well in certain areas, that you shouldn't have a good life? I would say absolutely not. And none of this is to say people don't earn what they have, right? It's about recognizing that doing what it takes to earn things can work or not work based on circumstances that are beyond your control. And we should be aware of that when we think about how to organize our world. And part of the resistance that people have to thinking about society this way is they don't want to admit, or maybe they don't believe, or maybe they don't know, that chance plays a huge role in where you end up in life. Nobody really wants to believe that, particularly if you've done well. If more people knew that, they'd be much more willing to consider how society should be organized, again, if they didn't know what their place within it was going to be. Check out John Rawls' A Theory of Justice. Really, really important document, and really nothing surprising in this study whatsoever. I've thought all along that there was a very good chance that Donald Trump was getting played by North Korea, and I really hope that Donald Trump is not being played by North Korea, but we are one step closer to confirming that Donald Trump is getting played by North Korea. North Korea has already canceled talks that were scheduled for today with South Korea and is now threatening to cancel the upcoming summit with the United States and with President Donald Trump. And at the very beginning of this entire farce, I made it clear that whether or not Trump had any influence on North Korea setting up this meeting, and I believe that Trump had no such influence, the linguistic analysis of North Korea's statements tells us that it never was what Trump believed it to be. Kim Jong-un reportedly agreed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That was interpreted as Kim is going to give up his nukes. And historically, what it has meant when he says, or anyone from North Korea says, we're going to denuclearize the peninsula, they mean if South Korea denuclearizes, which means the removal of all military members of the nuclear nation known as the United States of America. Similar analyses existed for other actions by North Korea. And in fact, there's now a North Korean official who's straight up saying Kim Jong-un has no interest in even meeting with the United States if the expectation is for one-sided demands to be made on North Korea to give up their nukes, which is exactly what I explained was going on. The statement from North Korea says that they are opposed to Libya-style denuclearization. I've said this before, okay? And Kim Jong-un has also made it clear that he knows it. Denuclearizing has been really bad for lots of countries that have done it. And Kim Jong-un is not just looking for someone to take his nukes, right? And even the recent release of the 3 American prisoners being held in North Korea seemed like Kim Jong-un was playing a role to then be able to say, listen, I've been acting in good faith. I have shown goodwill. But because of Americans and South Koreans, we are not going to have this meeting, or we're not going to ultimately end up making a deal, or whatever if it ends up falling apart. And we need look no further than the reason that North Korea's news agency is giving for the cancellation of the South Korea talks and the threat to cancel the America talks, which is the United States and South Korea are continuing to do military drills. And it was surprising that throughout this entire thing, the planning stages of the summit, we didn't really hear complaints from Kim Jong-un about military drills. Normally, he flips out. He calls it a rehearsal for an invasion of North Korea. And now suddenly we hear it, and all of a sudden Kim Jong-un actually has Trump in a very difficult position. Because if Trump ignores the threat from Kim Jong-un to cancel the entire thing and goes on with the drills, the summit may actually get canceled, and Trump will lose his chance for the photo op. He'll lose his chance for the handshake with Kim Jong-un, which he desperately wants. If Trump acquiesces and stops the military drills, he shows major weakness by his own standards and the standards of his followers, and it's also going to be problematic for him. Now, it appears as though in the last few hours, the U.S. has agreed to slightly lay off of the drills, but they're still going to continue. I want to go back to the main thing here. I hope Trump isn't being tricked and that all of this time and effort and money aren't going to end up going to waste. But as soon as we learned that North Korea's nuclear testing facility had reportedly fallen apart right before Kim Jong-un expressed an interest in denuclearization, the real intentions of Kim Jong-un became much clearer. And I know that the Trumpists and Trump are focused on the optics. Does Trump meet? Does he shake hands with Kim Jong-un? Is some agreement reached in principle? But the reality is that what we expected of the summit was a totally symbolic encounter, in the sense that North Korea has always had the MO of agreeing only to these sort of unenforceable and vague commitments and to require completely unrealistic concessions from the other side. And in the end, my priority is the North Korean people, right? Are the other civilians within striking distance of North Korea safe? They are not being helped by this, not so far in any case. And the Trumpist right is posting stuff online like, for example, from one website, wow, the liberals are rooting for Kim. That's not what it is, right? This was never about rooting for Trump's failure. It never was. It's always been skepticism based on history about what is actually going to take place here. We'll see what happens next, and I hope that Trump is not getting bamboozled. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Kristen Diesel. Kristen, thank you so much for being a member and joining at joinpakman.com. Also want to thank our long-term sustaining member of the day, Travis Milana, who's been with us since 2012. Kristen, Travis, thank you. You are great, great people supporting independent media. Join Kristen and Travis at joinpacman.com. If the normal prices, which by the way I find totally reasonable, are a bit high for your financial circumstances, no problem. We don't want finances to be a barrier to anybody joining, so you can use the coupon code VOTESOON18 to get a 40% discount. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. All right, it's that time of the week. It's time for Hatriot Mail.
Because it's time to make America hate again. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
What I can tell you is that this week's Hatriot has really strong opinions about something. I don't know what, but they are very clearly trying to make a point about which they feel very strongly. Let's see if we can figure out what that point is. Take a listen.
David Pakman, you are the definition of hate. Can't decide who is more ignorant, David Pakman or the viewers who see it. Weak on the facts, ignorant and proud of it. Parkman, sad. You are just a typical smarmy liberal. Killery losers don't.
That's exactly right. Killery losers don't. They don't what? It reminded me of this funny phrase that used to go around the internet where people would put, I accidentally the whole thing, and it looks like there's a word missing, and the obvious reaction is, you accidentally what the whole thing? Killery losers don't what? I don't know what this refers to, Pat.
Yeah, and it's not even like you're on Twitter here. I mean, you have plenty of characters. This is an email. You can write as much as you want. Finish the thought.
Yeah, there was no, you weren't being charged per character, Mr. Hatriot. And I say Mr. because obviously Hatriots are men. You can use the coupon code Hatriot40 to save 40% off of a membership, and 5 Hatriots cry every time you use the coupon code Hatriot40 at joinpacman.com. You go to joinpacman.com, pick your membership, coupon code HATRIOT40, chops 40% off of your membership, really upsets the Hatriots, which we love. I think you're going to like this story. It's from our favorite Fox News show, Fox and Friends. I'm going to set it up for you. 5 ISIS leaders were recently captured by the American military, okay? Donald Trump, our fearless orange leader, tweeted about it on Thursday of last week. Donald Trump tweeting, 5 most wanted leaders of ISIS just captured. Now, of course, if Trump's talking about it, there's a good chance Fox and Friends is going to talk about it. And of course, Fox and Friends did talk about it. The next day, they made a whole show out of talking about how the New York Times didn't report about the capture of these 5, the killing rather of these, capture, not the killing, the capture of these 5 ISIS leaders. I guess they were implying that because the New York Times doesn't like Trump, they're going to cover up any time that Trump does something good, even though it's not really clear what Trump did to capture the 5 ISIS leaders. Anyway, here's one of their hosts. I can't even keep up with who's on that show at this point. This is Pete Hegseth making fun of the New York Times for not covering the story. This is on Friday, okay?
Wow. Someone has to know that.
Yes.
Well,
thank you, Julie.
There you have it.
Did you find anything?
During headlines, I looked for the 5 ISIS leaders captured in the failing New York Times.
You're still looking?
And in the print edition today, I have not seen it yet.
Okay. Stay tuned. Meanwhile, on the front page, it does have the forecast for New York City, but we don't need that because we've got Janice Dean.
Yeah, Steve Ducey, notably nonplussed by the reference to the failing New York Times. Look at that terrible fake news, anti-Trump bias. Trump tweeted about it Thursday, and Fox and Friends covered it on Friday. And the New York Times just ignored it, except that the New York Times actually reported on it first on Wednesday night on their website, and then Thursday morning in their print edition. We actually have a screenshot from Wednesday evening in the New York Times. 5 top ISIS officials captured in U.S. Iraqi sting. Turns out Fox and Friends had the wrong newspaper. Shocker, right? These people dictate policy, okay? Trump watches Fox and Friends. This is state-run media or media-run state or state and media basically being the same thing. Call it whatever you want. Governance by idiocy is a better phrase for it, I think. And someone pointed out to me, David, listen, Fox News knew they were lying because Peter Hegseth, or whatever the guy's name is, said, I don't see it in the print edition, meaning he knew and they all knew that it was online. And probably they knew that it was in a print edition for the previous day also. And we see this and we think, how dumb, how silly, who could be influenced by this degree of incompetence on Fox and Friends? But people eat this right up. And you will meet people who might not even know that this talking point, the New York Times didn't cover the ISIS capture. They might not even know it came from Fox News or Fox and Friends, but they'll say when you talk to them, Trump is winning. He got ISIS leaders. Nobody talks about it. The New York Times doesn't talk about it. And they obviously wouldn't know because they certainly don't read the New York Times. So they just listen to Pete Hegseth or whatever this guy's name is. I don't know why I can't remember his name, claim about it as true. And now I have the correction for you, right? I'm going to play for you the video of Fox and Friends issuing a correction about their claim. Oh, that's right. The video doesn't exist because they never issued such a correction. This is dangerous stuff, Pat. People are falling for this stuff, and this is how these ideas get started. It's not a big deal, right? Oh, the New York Times didn't talk about this thing. Well, they did, but then it becomes part of the narrative as to why the New York Times can't be trusted and Fox and Friends can.
Yeah, and you could tell that the host was trying to play this off as an off-the-cuff idea, like he just spontaneously came up with it.
Yeah.
That wordsmithing, I think, is very telling. Got to demote this guy, get Brian Kilmeade back on the show. He'll do us justice.
Yeah, and maybe this was, I seriously have no idea what's going on over on that program at this point, whether it's that I know that they have different weekend
they
Fox
have the weekend
and Friends.
Team, yeah.
But this was Friday morning, and Steve Doocy is there, and then also this other woman who looks sort of familiar to me. I don't know what's going on with that program, but what's clear is Trump loves it, and it's shockingly one of the most powerful programs in corporate media at this time because of the extent to which the president is watching this show on a regular basis from the White House. Let's take a break. Coming up next, former Scientologist Lori Hodgson is back on the program. She had one of our top Scientology interviews we've ever done several years ago. A lot of crazy stuff is going on with Lori. She's going to join me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Lori Hodgson. She's a former Scientologist of 30 years, a second-generation Scientologist, in fact, author of the book A Mother's Heartbreak, How Scientology Destroyed My Family. And as Lori told us last time she was on, she is a second-generation Scientologist, was a second-generation Scientologist. She was experiencing disconnection from her children. And unfortunately, Lori, I wish you were joining us under better circumstances, but the disconnection from the children, which who are still within the church, is not going particularly well, is it?
It's not. It's actually been 8 years now. Last time I was on with you was 4 years. So hopefully next year I'll have a better interview for you and we're all back together again. Yeah,
I hope so. And I mean, so a lot of people will hear, you know, that in the last interview, it had been 4 years since you had seen your kids. Now it's been 8 years. What is actually in practice what keeps you from seeing your kids? In other words, why couldn't you just go and see them somewhere? Is it that you're being kept away? Are they being kept somewhere?
They are not. They're actually public Scientologists, so they're not in the C organization anymore. I don't know if they're on staff. But if I try to go see them, they're alerted. They track my flights, and they warn them not to talk to me. So the only way I could get back to see my children is to go back into Scientology and do the steps called A to E. I could tell you what those are real quickly if you want.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that would be interesting. If you, at this point, people might wonder whether you are so sort of permanently labeled a suppressive person or whatever other term might be assigned to you, that you're sort of beyond redemption as far as the Church of Scientology is concerned, or if there would be a path for you to rejoin.
Yes, so last summer I tried to work internally with the church. The only person when you're declared a suppressive person to talk to is called the International Justice Chief. His name is Mike Ellis. And I called last summer multiple times. I finally got through to his receptionist, and she told me he never takes calls. And I said, well, I want to work out the situation with my children. I want to work with you guys. Let's work out a plan. Well, he doesn't take calls. They said, well, how do I reach him? And they said for me to write a hard copy letter, which I did. And I didn't hear back for a while. And then I got a letter back. And I just asked if we could work out where I respect them doing Scientology. I won't bring it up, and they can respect me going back to my baptized religion, which is Lutheran. I got a letter back, and they said, if you want to get back in good standing with the church, then you need to do the steps A to E. Those steps, David, are you have to basically say you've been lying about everything that I'm telling the truth about, and making a public announcement like that. Like I'd have to come on your show and say I'm lying, and I haven't lied about anything.
Sure.
Also, I would have to go back into Scientology and pay a lot of money for counseling, and it's like security type counseling, like a lie detector. And then I have to retrain everything I did in Scientology, and I don't want to be a Scientologist anymore after what they did to my children. I can't be in that organization.
Lori, you mentioned your birth religion, so to speak. Your baptism religion is Lutheran. I'm curious, did you ever, when you were in the Church of Scientology, did you literally believe their teachings? And the reason I ask is I'm currently working my way through Jeff Gwynn's great book on the People's Temple, of course, Jim Jones, which led to 900 people literally drinking the Kool-Aid and dying in Guyana in the 1970s. And a lot of that book exposes that there were followers of Jim Jones who did not really believe the religious teachings, but saw that, for example, the social mission of his church or cult, or call it what you will, was a positive one, or that membership was good for people, it kept kids out of trouble, whatever. So my question to you is, did you adhere to the religious beliefs of the Church of Scientology?
I did not, because I was baptized Lutheran. I believed in God, and my husband, the children's father, didn't believe in God, and so that was hard for us. But I had that really good background, and I also didn't believe a lot of things. I would question them and get in trouble for them. And I didn't do the higher levels of Scientology where I think they teach, you know, things that I didn't learn. I didn't go past the state of clear. So I did the lower level of Scientology. So I wouldn't know what those beliefs are.
Lori, in your book, you talk about being an FBI source when the FBI was investigating Scientology about 8 years ago for possible human trafficking through the Sea Org, which is sort of the leadership or management structure of Scientology. If it's okay with you, I'd love to learn a little bit about that. And my sort of initial question would be, how did the FBI initially get in touch with you, or how did you become in contact with the FBI?
They found out through a mutual friend that my son was in the Sea organization during that human trafficking investigation, and they wanted to come down and interview me what happened with my son. They found out that the Church of Scientology made my son sign a $3 million gag contract, and they definitely wanted to interview me and my son because he was only 17. He was a minor at that time. So they came to my office and interviewed me what happened when Jeremy was in the Sea organization. They tried to interview Jeremy, but unfortunately, I guess the church found out, and Jeremy was nowhere to be located, and she couldn't believe that she couldn't find him. So
she being the FBI agent that you were working with?
Yeah. And
okay.
She also interviewed my mom and a friend that I can't say who that is.
And Lori, were you already out of the church in 2010 when the FBI came to you?
Yes, I was out. They came in 2011. I resigned in August 2010. And after I went and saw Marty Rathbun the first time in December 2010, the FBI started working with me around February 2011. So they were working with me when I told them I was going to go see Marty the second time. And the day that the Squirrel Busters arrived, I was in Texas seeing Marty. I was the first one that brought them. She told me to call her if the FBI agent told me to call her if there was anything, that I needed to report. And she answered right away. When John Allender and Mark Warlick part of the Squirrel Busters were there.
So for people who don't know, the Squirrel Busters are this sort of goon squad that Scientology sends around either to intimidate people, to scare them. And in your case, you were down in Texas near Marty Rathbun's place, who we've also interviewed on the program, and they showed up there effectively.
Right, and I called her, and she told me to do a police report right away, which we did.
Talk to me about what is in, because to me, when I hear about what Scientology allegedly does, it seems that it's not just child trafficking that the FBI would be interested in. So can you talk a little bit about what sorts of things did the FBI ask you about?
They asked mainly about Jeremy, his schooling, you know, how much schooling he had. The Sea Organization broke the minor consent form where he was supposed to have regular schooling, and he only had like 5 days. They really wanted to talk about, you know, why did I know anything, why they made him sign a $3 million gag contract to not speak out. They wanted to know why he was off the base. The Sea Organization, they have a base, a place where they are. He was off the base when he wanted to leave for 2 weeks, and he was kept away without any guardian. And they wanted to go over that. And they also wanted to go over why I was threatened in the parking lot by Jan Allender. He's a Scientologist, the day after I got back from Marty's. So they basically were interested in my story, the fair game that Scientology does, which means they're going to do whatever they can do to shut up a person speaking out, and my son. So they were interested in what happened with me, and the recruiting of my children. When I was not at a good point, I just got home from the hospital. They tried to recruit my 15-year-old son. Then my daughter was recruited in the Sea Org and said goodbye to me when I was in the hospital. I mean, you just don't do that. So they were really interested in that part of what happened with my story.
Do you continue to be harassed by members of the Church of Scientology? Are they currently, do they still put you under surveillance of any kind?
The latest thing they did, no, because I haven't gone to Texas in the last 4 years. If I go to Texas, then yes. You know, black SUV cars will follow me. They'll be at the hotel. They'll stare at me. They'll warn my kids. So that's what happened 4 years ago. The only thing that's happened is my book came out on Kindle on April 2nd. And they put a video of my kids on. And I just saw that. I didn't know. But it's on their site. And I saw that same video 2 years ago on Good Morning America when I was on, but I only saw a part of it. They put the full thing in on the same day that my Kindle book was out. They put it up on their site.
What options exist for reconnecting with your kids? Is it basically at this point up to them in the sense that there's nothing, doesn't sound like there's anything physically stopping them from seeing you, but that the Church of Scientology warns them about where you're going to be, and it seems that they've been sort of successfully brainwashed into not wanting to see you?
That's true. I think that the best thing is if they read my book. They will see the truth. They will see how hard I've been fighting for them, that I tried to work internally with the church. That didn't get me anywhere. And they can see me, but then they will get kicked out of Scientology. And so that's their, you know, they just can't see their mom. They're going to lose what they believe in. And actually, David, I don't even know if they believe in it anymore. They might be scared. I have no idea. I wish I could just talk to them.
What are their ages currently?
Jeremy's going to be 25 in June, and Jessica's going to be 28 in August. And they just have, I watched this video, and they have old information. They have information from a long time ago. I don't think the church tells them anything that's new or how hard I'm trying to reconnect with my children. And I mean, even working internally, I've written them, I send them presents, I try to call. I'm blocked in all ways to reach them. And my son is so mad that I go to the media. I wish I could just call him privately or talk to him face to face without anybody interfering. But Scientology prevents me from doing that.
You mentioned that their father was not religious. Is he involved with Scientology currently, and are they in touch with him?
Oh, very much so. Yes. He is still active in Scientology.
Wow. The book is called A Mother's Heartbreak, How Scientology Destroyed My Family. Lori Hodgson, thanks again for talking to me, and really, you know, only the best to you in the future of this horrible situation.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks for having me on, and I'm just going to stay strong and keep fighting and educate other families what they do, how destructive they are to families if one member doesn't agree with what they want to do with your children. And it's wrong. I just wanted mine to be in school, and I want to educate others. So that's why I did my book, and I hope my kids read it, because I think they'll give me a call if they read my book.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've got a bunch of major stuff to announce. We've been building up to a lot of these things, and we're ready to start rolling out some great changes to the David Pakman Show. None bad, I would say. Mostly pretty good. Over the next few weeks, you're going to see, number one, the show become longer. So within our hour, we are going to be reducing the amount of commercial breaks. This is something we've been working on for a while and working out the logistics with each of the platforms that we're on. And what that's going to allow us to do is not only be less annoying to people because there will be fewer minutes of commercials, but also all of that time will be replaced with more content, which basically means we'll be able to do longer stories, more stories. Every single day, we're going to be doing about 10% more content, and you're going to see this rolled out sort of in phases over the next few weeks. We've also got, and he was on camera today for a little bit, we have our new producer, Max, who has been alongside Pat today. He hasn't said anything, and that's totally fine, but he has been doing a lot, and that's really what matters, right? That's really the important thing.
I didn't expect him to survive past the Hatriot Mail. I thought he would have left by now.
Hatriot Mail is you, and also the public flogging that Pat insists on in the morning. Both of those things often will run people right out of here. But yeah, he's gotten through both, Pat, so I think
part of the hazing process.
It bodes well for sure. So that's happening. We're extending the show. We've got our new producer here. On YouTube, we're going to start engaging with the community tab. There's going to be content posted there for everybody, but also we will be doing some sponsors-only posts on YouTube, and that's something that's new, that's growing as well. You can become a YouTube sponsor for $4.99 a month, and that's going to develop into its whole unique set of benefits and ways to interact with the show. And really, in the end, right, what's the point of all this nonsense? It's to create more and better content for you and engage with a bigger and bigger audience over time. And we talked yesterday about the new gear and t-shirt designs that we have. We've got a uranium and nuclear weapons t-shirt. We've got an If Ivanka Weren't My Daughter t-shirt, which, by the way, since we held up one of those yesterday, they have been selling like crazy at davidpakman.com/gear. We've got a very stable Genius design. And if you, by the way, have design ideas, the designs we have all been created by the audience, right? So send them in. The only real requirements are they've got to be relatively square, slightly taller than they are wide, with a transparent background in very high resolution, okay? And if you have design ideas, send them in to david@davidpakman.com. If we choose to use yours on our store, I'll send you a couple free t-shirts of that design, or if you prefer other designs, we'll send you that as well. We also have upcoming, and this is very exciting, a new miniseries. We did the critical thinking miniseries a couple months ago. We are launching a pseudoscience miniseries where we will be debunking psychic arts. I don't call it psychic science. Psychic arts. We will be debunking astrology. We will be debunking Reiki. We will be debunking telekinesis, all sorts of stuff. And right now, YouTube sponsors can vote on some of the topics that will be in the pseudoscience miniseries. So if you're not a YouTube sponsor, go to youtube.com/The David Pakman Show and click the blue sponsor button and vote. Approaching 500,000 YouTube subscribers. That's also a really good milestone. We've also been running some tests here for improving our remote setup so that when I'm at a conference or remote, we will have HD video and high quality audio. Right now, when I broadcast remotely, I'm basically Skyping into the studio. Pat's not pleased with the quality. No. Max is liable to just disappear if he was ever exposed to the poor quality of it. So we have been running some tests for upgrading the remote setup to full high definition. The test, I would say, Pat, that the test went very well.
Yeah, super well. I was very impressed with the equipment. Still, it could take a few weeks before we have it ready to go.
Oh,
but
yeah, absolutely.
I think the remote setup is going to be a lot better.
There's heavy, heavy testing that's taking place here. So listen, I hope you're enjoying what we're doing. I hope that you will support more and better programming. Patreon is a great way to do it. Just throw us $1 a month, and that really does go a long way if enough people do it at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And membership is always great, right? We've got a 40% discount coupon, which is Vote Soon 18. And if you use that coupon, you will, at joinpakman.com, you will save 40%. So very exciting things going on. Not circling the drain like many Hatriots say that we're doing. Okay, I've told you before about the evangelical support for Israel being very heavily driven by the belief that by supporting Israel, the second coming of Jesus Christ will happen. And depending on your flavor of Christianity, this will bring about the rapture or the apocalypse or the end times or the end of the world, whichever lovely phrase your sect attributes to that event. I've also told you before about outrageous Fox News host Jeanine Pirro, who was at some point a judge somewhere, really scary to think about. And she combined her insanity with the evangelical insanity around Israel in one lovely segment where she praised Donald Trump's decision to move the embassy that the United States has in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. Listen to Jeanine Pirro here, just gushing about how great Donald Trump is.
Donald Trump sent Iranians who are the descendants of Persia a message to reflect on their own history.
Right.
And that it was the king of Persia who 1,000 years before Muhammad was even born that said Jerusalem was the capital of the Jewish people's country.
Crucial.
There will be no Ottoman empires or Shia nations that will destroy Jerusalem any longer. Donald Trump recognized history. He, like King Cyrus before him, fulfilled the biblical prophecy of the gods worshipped by Jews, Christians, and yes, Muslims, that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish state, and that the Jewish people finally deserve a righteous, free, and sovereign Israel.
I noticed she has that same weird pronunciation of Jerusalem that Trump had in that video, where it wasn't clear whether he was trying to eat his tongue or maybe had a denture issue. I wonder if maybe it's like having veneers that are too big or something like that. It's a weird, did you notice that, Pat?
Yeah.
It's a weird thing that's going on
Maybe
there.
it's connected to being a Trump supporter in some way,
I don't
although
know.
it would be hard to draw that line exactly.
Yeah, hard to parse it out. How is this news? Like, how does this count as news analysis? These are quite literally the rantings of a disjointed and ignorant person. And I wonder, like, do they know that this is the biblical prophecy that ends with the destruction of life or the rapture? I know some of them know that and love it. Like, they think that's the greatest thing, nothing better than the rapture. But I think that that's part of the story that some of these people are missing. And the other just laughable thing that shows you how transparently devoid of any meaning all of this nonsense is that in reality, the relocation of an embassy doesn't have anything to do with biblical prophecy, right? Like, Jerusalem as the real and enduring capital of Israel either is or is not. But a nearly obese 71-year-old president saying that we're moving a building from one city to another, that doesn't materially change the biblical meaning of what's going on. And that's what's sort of truly beneath evangelical support for Israel. It's this nonsense where more than 50% of American evangelical Christians believe literally that Israel is a requirement for the rapture or Armageddon or the apocalypse, call it what you want, the end of the world. They want that, right? And they see Jerusalem as ground zero for that. And it is really important to understand this. When you hear about the political support that Israel gets from the right, which is, by the way, the same place where a lot of anti-Semitism exists as well, which is an interesting thing. They don't like Israel for the Jews or for the great weather and beaches or for the food of Tel Aviv. They believe that Israel will lead to the fulfillment of their religious prophecy. And these are the same types who believe that the Bible predicted 9/11. This is a death cult of the most extreme proportions. And of course, like every biblical prophecy, nothing will happen. right? These people won't be around to see it. They'll just say, well, it's going to happen at some point after I'm no longer alive. And it is vile that this counts as a news report on Fox News, truly. Yeah, Pat.
And does Judge Jeanine really think that Trump is sitting around at the White House, eating his junk food, watching Fox News, and he thinks, you know what, I'm going to adhere to thousands of years of Persian history. I'm going to be just like King Cyrus. That's not the president that we know and love.
Yeah, certainly it's not what he's thinking, but regardless, they still see him as a guy who is somehow, I guess, fulfilling the prophecy. And it's deranged and it's depraved. And apparently on Fox News, it counts as reasonable news commentary, which is the scariest thing of all. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Yesterday, I did a piece, about 12 minutes, talking about my concern around pseudo-intellectualism and the sort of environment that is very, very receptive to pseudo-intellectualism. And a lot of people thought I was saying that Sam Harris is not an intellectual. Let me give you an example of one of these messages. This one came in by voicemail early this morning.
Hey, David. I just listened to your take on the pseudo-intellectualism. And I agree with most of those folks that were named in that article, but Sam Harris, really? I don't understand how he's a pseudo-intellectual. Is it because he offends numerous people when he claims that the ideas of Christianity and Islam are completely foolish and stupid? That's the only thing I could think of. Other than that, I'm lost. Help me out, David. I'll talk to you later.
So listen. I mentioned Sam Harris once in yesterday's story, merely in that he was mentioned in a New York Times article called The Intellectual Dark Web by Barry Weiss. I mentioned Sam Harris's name and a number of other names only insofar as I was telling you about the article that sort of got me thinking about the story I did yesterday. I never said yesterday that Sam Harris is not an intellectual. I've read a lot of Sam Harris's work. I have some political disagreements with Sam Harris. I think that his book, The Moral Landscape, is endlessly fascinating. I've never really taken a position on whether Sam Harris is or isn't an intellectual. I believe that he is, and that's okay to say that and still say that I disagree with some of the stuff that he said. My commentary yesterday was not about saying Sam Harris is not an intellectual, and if that's mostly what you focused on, you really missed the point of my entire commentary, okay? So no, I never said Sam Harris isn't an intellectual. I mentioned his name yesterday in passing as one of many 5, 6, 7 different people that were mentioned by Barry Weiss. I think Steven Pinker was mentioned. I'm not saying Steven Pinker is not an intellectual. The commentary was about the environment in which pseudo-intellectualism and faux intellectualism is sort of welcomed and embraced by people rather than about saying who is or isn't on the list of intellectuals. We have a great bonus show today. We'll talk about Seattle's new head tax, which will charge big companies a fee to help the homeless. We will also talk about Uber dropping its arbitration requirements for sexual assault victims. And lastly, the Trump administration is considering housing migrant children on military bases as a result of Jeff Sessions getting tough on undocumented immigration. All of those stories and more are on today's bonus show, which you can access by becoming a member at joinpacman.com. If you want a discount, you can use the coupon code VOTESOON18. You can also access the bonus show by becoming a patron at the $5 or higher level at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Don't miss the bonus show. And don't miss all the great new t-shirt designs available at davidpakman.com/gear, selling like hotcakes after yesterday. What are hotcakes anyway? Is it a type of food? I don't even know. Is it like a patty cake?
Apparently they sell well, that's why.
I'm going to look it up. I'm curious. What is a hotcake, and should I bring one in for lunch tomorrow?
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.